It began with a silence so strange that even the walls of Buckingham Palace seemed to hold their breath. Reporters stood outside the gates, cameras ready, voices trembling with speculation, while the royal flag fluttered in the dull gray air above. Something was wrong, terribly wrong, and for the first time in years, the palace press office refused to comment. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Then, just before dawn, the royal statement appeared. 6 short lines. No pictures, no smiles, only words that would shake an entire nation. Her Royal Highness Princess Charlotte has been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition. The family requests privacy during this time. And just like that, the illusion of royal invincibility shattered. What if the little girl whose laughter once echoed through Kensington Palace gardens was now fighting a battle she never asked for? What if the world's most adored young princess was suddenly facing something even her family's power and privilege couldn't protect her from? The public had always seen Charlotte as the fearless one, the tiny royal who waved to cameras, corrected her brothers, and carried herself with confidence beyond her years. But that morning, something changed. Overnight, she wasn't just Princess Charlotte of Wales. She became a symbol of fragility, of vulnerability, of the one truth even crowns can't escape. Sickness does not bow to royalty. For a family already accustomed to whispers, this was different. This wasn't about scandal or politics. This was about a child, a daughter, a princess. But how long had the palace known? And why, according to insiders, had certain signs been ignored for so long? The statement begged more questions than it answered. It was clinical, detached, as if written by someone terrified of saying too much. And yet, hidden between the lines was an unmistakable note of fear. Because this wasn't a seasonal illness. It wasn't exhaustion or a passing virus. This was something that would stay with her for life. People across the world stopped what they were doing to read that message. News anchors' voices trembled as they repeated the words on air. A rare autoimmune condition. The phrase rolled through the media like thunder, echoing across television screens and social feeds. But what exactly did that mean? What kind of condition could strike a child so young and leave even royal doctors struggling for answers? It wasn't just medical. It was emotional. It was generational. Because beneath the palace facade, beneath the manicured lawns and carefully rehearsed smiles, there was a family breaking in silence. Imagine Catherine, the Princess of Wales, sitting beside her daughter's hospital bed. The same Catherine who had once balanced diplomacy and motherhood so effortlessly, now staring at her child's fragile hands connected to monitors. She had seen pain before, but not like this. Not this kind of helplessness. And William, the future king, pacing the corridor, his phone in one hand, his other clenched in a silent rage. He had faced war zones, funerals, public criticism. But nothing could prepare him for this. Nothing could prepare a father to hear that his little girl might face a lifetime of medical care, treatment, and uncertainty. The doctors spoke softly, using words like manageable, long-term, and rare. But for parents, every word was a dagger. Rare. It sounded special, but it really meant lonely. It meant unknown. It meant they were walking a path very few could understand. And yet, the world outside demanded details. The press wanted statements. People wanted answers. And the royal machine, that endless cycle of control and image, was already spinning. But this time, the palace couldn't control the narrative. Something about this story struck differently. Perhaps it was the innocence of the child involved. Or perhaps, deep down, everyone realized what the royal family had been reminded of that morning. No matter how grand the title, life is fragile, unpredictable, and cruelly fair. Still, one question lingered louder than all the others. Why now? Why release the statement suddenly, without warning? Why, after months of perfect public appearances, from Easter to Trooping the Color, was there now a desperate plea for privacy? Some whispered that the palace had been forced into honesty after a journalist uncovered hospital visits hidden under the guise of school activities. Others said Catherine herself insisted on telling the truth before rumors spiraled out of control. Whatever the reason, one thing was clear: this was not part of the royal plan. Because Princess Charlotte, at just 9 years old, wasn't supposed to carry such a burden. She was supposed to represent hope, continuity, and joy. The third in line to the throne, the future face of a modern monarchy. Yet suddenly, she became a reminder of life's darkest realities. And it hit Britain hard. Crowds gathered outside Kensington Palace with cards and flowers. Social media flooded with messages of support and prayer. Hashtags trended globally within minutes. People compared her courage to her late grandmother, Princess Diana, calling Charlotte the people's princess reborn. But behind closed doors, those same comparisons haunted the family. Because they remembered what happened the last time the world's sympathy focused too intensely on one royal heart. They remembered Diana. The flashbulbs, the intrusion, the lies disguised as concern. William swore his children would never live through that. But now, that vow was slipping away. The public's love was genuine, but its hunger for information was endless. Catherine withdrew from public duties, citing family health matters. She was seen less often. Her smiles, when they did appear, didn't quite reach her eyes. And when the cameras caught her leaving a hospital under cover of night, the truth could no longer be denied. The royal machine moved quickly, restricting media access, tightening schedules, issuing polite but firm requests for privacy. Yet nothing could stop the tide, because people didn't just want to know what was happening. They wanted to understand why. What caused this rare autoimmune condition? Was it genetic? Was it triggered by stress, environment, something more? And could it get worse? Even medical experts joined the conversation, offering opinions on air, guessing possibilities without ever naming specifics. It was the one royal mystery that wasn't scandalous, it was deeply human. And for once, the palace's silence wasn't arrogance. It was fear. Fear of saying the wrong thing. Fear of letting hope outshine reality. Fear of a truth too painful to share. Behind the gold-trimmed doors of Kensington Palace, a team of royal doctors worked around the clock. Some sources said the Princess of Wales barely left her daughter's side, sleeping in hospital chairs, refusing to delegate care to staff. Others claimed the king visited privately, without entourage, holding his granddaughter's hand and whispering prayers she might never remember but would one day feel. And yet, as the palace struggled to maintain control, the world was already piecing together a timeline. Whispers of earlier doctor visits, unexplained absences, and even fainting episodes at school began resurfacing. People remembered photos where Charlotte appeared pale or distant. Every past moment was suddenly reinterpreted under a new light, the light of hindsight. Had the royal family known? Had they kept it hidden for months? Or was this as sudden as it seemed? The contradictions were endless. Theories spread faster than facts. But amid the noise, one truth stood out. This wasn't a public relations crisis. It was a family crisis. Because when the cameras stopped rolling and the gates closed, they weren't royals anymore. They were parents. A mother holding her daughter's hand. A father whispering promises that everything would be okay. Promises even he didn't fully believe. And yet, amidst the sorrow, there was strength. Catherine was reportedly determined that Charlotte's condition wouldn't define her. Friends close to the couple said she began researching treatments herself, speaking to specialists, organizing private consultations, and quietly supporting children's health charities under pseudonyms. It wasn't just about Charlotte anymore. It was about awareness, resilience, and hope. Because somewhere deep inside, Catherine believed this story, their story, could change how the world saw invisible illnesses. Still, despite her quiet courage, there was one fear she couldn't shake. How long before the truth behind Charlotte's condition, the real truth, reached the public? Because according to palace insiders, the official statement wasn't the whole story. Not by a long shot. There were details omitted, tests unmentioned, and an internal debate that nearly tore the royal communications team apart. Some believed the people had the right to know everything. Others insisted full disclosure would do more harm than good. In the end, compromise won, a vague statement, carefully worded, released under pressure. But behind that decision was a storm brewing within the monarchy itself. And one question loomed over every conversation in those marble corridors. How much longer can they keep control of this narrative before the truth leaks? Because when truth and image collide in the royal world, history shows something always breaks. Outside the palace, crowds still gathered nightly. Candles flickered under the railings. Letters from children, parents, and even hospital patients poured in. Many of them said the same thing. You are not alone. And that was the one message Catherine clung to. But behind her calm face, insiders say she was unraveling, torn between the duty of a princess and the desperation of a mother. She wanted to tell the world everything. She wanted to scream the truth. But royal protocol demanded restraint. Every sentence, every emotion, every move was measured. So she stayed silent. For now. And as the public's concern turned into speculation, one chilling detail began circulating in royal circles. A doctor's warning that the next few weeks would determine everything. That single line, whispered from behind hospital curtains, spread like wildfire through the royal household. It wasn't just about treatment anymore. It was about survival. Because if Charlotte's condition progressed beyond the early stage, even with the best care, it could permanently alter her life. And that realization hit Catherine like a thunderclap. Because this wasn't just about a medical report. It was about the future of her daughter. And, in a way, the future of the monarchy itself. Imagine a kingdom watching with bated breath, a mother holding her child's hand, and a family fighting to stay united under the weight of both public duty and private grief. But no one, not even the king, could predict what came next. Because as the palace scrambled to manage the media and doctors rushed to stabilize Charlotte's health, one hidden truth was quietly making its way through the upper levels of the royal staff, something that would shake the royal household even deeper than the diagnosis itself. And when that truth finally surfaced, it would reveal that this heartbreaking announcement was only the beginning of a much darker royal chapter. What came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming that it was supposed to be an ordinary royal day. Polished, predictable, and perfectly rehearsed. The kind of day where nothing goes wrong, where the palace hums like a finely tuned machine. Morning staff briefings, security rotations, scheduled smiles, and meticulously timed photo ops. But then, everything stopped. At first, no one inside Buckingham Palace knew why. The phones were silent, the corridors eerily calm. Normally, aides darted between offices with clipboards, tea trays, and urgent updates. Yet that morning, whispers replaced footsteps. Messages were short, instructions unclear. Something had happened, something big. It started quietly at Kensington Palace, miles away. Charlotte hadn't shown up for her morning lessons. A call had gone out to one of her tutors, then another, but no one knew where she was. Within minutes, a senior aide received a coded text from a royal protection officer. It contained only 3 words: emergency, hospital, discreet. In an instant, the entire royal communication network went into lockdown. Phones were rerouted. Staff were silenced. Vehicles were dispatched under pseudonyms. By the time Buckingham Palace received confirmation that Princess Charlotte had been taken to a private medical facility, the news had already reached one journalist, a tabloid photographer stationed near Lambrook School. He noticed an unusual convoy leaving the area: black Range Rovers, tinted windows, unmarked plates, the unmistakable signature of royal movement. He didn't know it then, but that single photograph would ignite the largest wave of royal speculation since Queen Elizabeth's passing. Inside the palace, confusion reigned. Senior aides huddled in a room lined with gold-framed portraits of ancestors who had survived wars, abdications, and scandals, yet none had faced this. They whispered in half-sentences, glancing nervously toward the closed doors of the communications office, where press secretaries debated whether to inform the king. "Not yet," one said. "Let's wait for the doctors." "Wait for what?" another snapped. "The world's already watching." Meanwhile, at the hospital, Catherine sat alone in a white corridor that smelled faintly of antiseptic and lilies. Her phone buzzed relentlessly, but she couldn't bring herself to answer. Every vibration felt like a demand she couldn't fulfill. The crown wanting updates, the press wanting statements, her husband wanting answers. But there were none. Not yet. William arrived minutes later, pale and frantic. Security cameras caught him rushing through the side entrance, his jaw tight, his usual calm shattered. The staff stepped back, their silence speaking volumes. This wasn't the Prince of Wales arriving on official duty. This was a father in panic. Inside the hospital room, the scene was devastatingly human. A small bed, machines blinking in rhythmic precision, a child lying too still for comfort. The royal family had always been trained to keep composure under any circumstance: funerals, wars, divorces, even global scandals. But in that sterile hospital room, There was no training to fall back on. There was only fear. Doctors spoke in medical terms that sounded more like riddles. Autoimmune markers, inflammation, systemic reaction. None of it made sense to a mother who just wanted to hear one word: safe. But that word never came. Instead, they were told more tests were needed, more monitoring, more waiting. And so, for the first time in modern royal memory, the palace fell completely silent. No statements, no schedules, no smiling photos to assure the world everything was fine. Because nothing was fine. Back at Buckingham Palace, the silence spread like fog. Press officers fielded calls they couldn't answer. Foreign embassies requested information. Even within the family, confusion reigned. Prince George's schedule was quietly rearranged. Louis stayed home under the care of Carol Middleton. Every decision, every delay, was designed to buy time. But time was exactly what they were running out of. By mid-afternoon, the rumor mill had already begun to spin. A leaked photo showed William entering the hospital through a side entrance. Twitter, or rather, what remained of it, exploded with theories. Was it a sports injury? A food allergy? Something worse? Then came the second image. Catherine, leaving hours later, her face pale, her eyes red. She wasn't smiling, and she wasn't waving. That alone was enough to send shockwaves through the British press. Within minutes, tabloids were printing words like emergency, collapse, and critical condition. Inside the communications office, royal aides debated how to respond. Every second they waited, the story grew wilder. Every silence was seen as confirmation of catastrophe. But how do you issue a statement when you don't even know the full truth yourself? Doctors were still running tests. Results were pending. Yet the pressure to speak was immense. Say something, one aide shouted. Anything. Not until the family approves, another replied. For nearly 24 hours, the palace said nothing. Reporters camped outside the gates in freezing wind. Crowds gathered with candles and flowers. The world was waiting for a single update, one word, one reassurance. But behind the palace walls, reassurance was in short supply. William barely slept. Catherine refused to leave her daughter's side. Every time a nurse entered the room, her heart stopped. Every beep of the monitor became a prayer. And then, in the middle of the night, the lead physician stepped in with the results. The diagnosis came in fragments. Words too complex to process, too heavy to ignore. Autoimmune, chronic, lifelong management required. The room went silent. Catherine's hand covered her mouth. William looked down, his knuckles white as he clenched the hospital bed rail. The only sound was the quiet hum of the machines, steady but cruel. Each pulse a reminder that their little girl's life had just changed forever. The physician continued gently, explaining what this meant. Regular treatment, careful monitoring, avoiding certain triggers, and, the part that broke Catherine, the condition could flare unpredictably, without warning. No amount of royal privilege could erase what those words meant. For a few moments, the future King and Queen of England were just parents sitting in disbelief, their world collapsing around them. Outside, the press still had no idea. At 7:30 a.m. the following morning, an internal royal memo circulated. A decision had been made. The palace would release a statement before noon. Short, factual, emotionally restrained. No diagnosis details, no dramatic language. Just confirmation and a plea for privacy. But even that was easier said than done, because not everyone within the palace agreed. Some senior advisors believed transparency was the only way to maintain public trust. Others feared it would invite endless intrusion. There were arguments, tears, even a brief shouting match behind closed doors, an extraordinary scene in a place defined by control. And in the midst of that chaos, someone, no one knew who, leaked the core of the story to a trusted journalist. By the time the official statement went live, the headlines had already broken. The internet lit up in seconds. Princess Charlotte diagnosed with rare illness. News anchors repeated the headline with somber voices. Social media erupted with sympathy, confusion, and wild speculation. In 1 hour, the world went from wondering to mourning. Across Britain, schools paused for moments of silence. Crowds began forming outside Buckingham and Kensington palaces. People laid teddy bears, letters, even drawings from children who barely understood what illness meant, but somehow understood what heartbreak felt like. And yet, the royal household remained in chaos. Because while the public reacted with compassion, internally, a storm was brewing. Not everyone believed the full truth had been told. Some suspected the diagnosis wasn't new, that symptoms had been dismissed for months as fatigue or growing pains. A palace insider would later reveal that Charlotte's condition might have shown signs long before her hospital admission: unexplained fevers, skin reactions, and episodes of sudden exhaustion. But royal life leaves little room for vulnerability. Public smiles take precedence over private pain. And so, what should have been an early warning became a full crisis. By evening, television screens across the world showed the palace gates surrounded by flowers. People wept as if they had lost a member of their own family. And in a way, they had, because Princess Charlotte wasn't just royalty. She was hope incarnate, the child who had made even the most cynical hearts soften when she waved at crowds or giggled during public ceremonies. Now, that laughter was replaced by the haunting image of a little girl fighting an unseen enemy. Inside the palace, a different kind of silence settled. Not just shock, but guilt. Catherine couldn't stop replaying the last few months. The times Charlotte said she felt tired. The mornings she didn't want to go to school. The complaints of aching joints or mild fevers. Each one dismissed as something small, something ordinary. Every memory now felt like a warning they had missed. William, too, carried his own private guilt. He'd been buried in royal duties, balancing global appearances and constitutional obligations. But how do you balance fatherhood and destiny when both are collapsing at once? He stood by the hospital window, watching London wake beneath a pale sky, and whispered to no one, "She's just a child." But this child was now the center of a global storm. Doctors began to prepare long-term plans, outlining treatment schedules, dietary changes, immune management strategies. The family's private calendar was rearranged, royal tours postponed, public appearances canceled. In the space of 48 hours, their world had shrunk to a hospital room. The royal machine, usually flawless in its response to crisis, struggled to adapt to something it couldn't spin: a disease. There was no scandal to contain, no narrative to rewrite. Illness isn't a headline you can bury. It lingers. It demands honesty. And that terrified them. Because this wasn't a story about monarchy. It was about humanity. About a little girl who, despite her royal title, had become just another patient waiting for answers. Outside, supporters gathered holding handmade signs that read, "Stay strong, Princess Charlotte." A soft chorus of voices sang, "God save the king." But it was the verse for "God save the princess" that brought people to tears. Somewhere inside the hospital, Catherine heard it faintly through the window and broke down. Not from sadness, but from the realization that the world's love was both a comfort and a curse. Every gesture of support reminded her that privacy was no longer possible. Every tear shed by strangers reminded her that her daughter's pain was now public property. And as the evening fell, a new fear crept in. What if this illness wasn't the end of their troubles? What if it was only the beginning? Because just as the family began adjusting to the reality of Charlotte's diagnosis, a quiet conversation in the palace corridors suggested there was more to the story. Something buried deep in medical archives. Something that could connect Charlotte's condition to a much older royal secret. It started as a whisper, a name scribbled in an old file. And when William found out what that name meant, he realized the battle ahead wasn't just against an illness. It was against history itself. But what that discovery revealed would change the way the world viewed the royal family forever. And no one, not even the king, was prepared for it. The sun had barely risen when the official statement was released, but by then, the entire world was already awake. Journalists huddled outside Buckingham Palace in the freezing dawn light, their breath fogging the air as they prepared for history. The atmosphere was tense, the kind of stillness that comes right before a storm breaks. At 8 a.m. London time, the Royal Communications Office sent out a brief email to every major outlet. Just 42 words long. No royal seal. No photograph. No ceremonial flourish. The message was stripped of all the pomp and circumstance usually associated with palace announcements. It reads simply, "Her Royal Highness Princess Charlotte of Wales has been diagnosed with a rare autoimmune condition. The family is working closely with medical specialists to ensure her ongoing care. Their Royal Highnesses appreciate the public's understanding and privacy at this time." That was it. No name for the condition. No medical details. No timeline. Within minutes, those words dominated every screen on Earth. The BBC interrupted its morning program. CNN went live with breaking coverage. On social media, hashtag #PrayForCharlotte trended globally within 7 minutes. The world stopped. It wasn't just a royal update. It was a seismic cultural moment. For millions who had watched Charlotte grow up, the little girl with the cheeky grin, the confident wave, the twinkle that reminded so many of her late grandmother, Diana, it felt personal. This wasn't the cold, distant monarchy of the past. This was a family that had invited the world to share in its joy, and now, its pain. Even hardened anchors choked up as they read the news aloud. On one broadcast, a journalist paused mid-sentence, struggling to continue. "She's just 9, she whispered. For once, the headlines weren't about drama or scandal. They were about heartbreak. But inside the palace, the reaction wasn't relief, it was panic. Because while the public was hearing the story for the first time, the people inside those gilded walls had been living it for weeks. The statement's release wasn't a carefully planned act of transparency. It was damage control, forced by leaks, internal pressure, and a media storm spiraling out of control. Only hours before its release, royal aides had been in full-scale crisis mode. The night before, multiple tabloids received anonymous tips from an insider source claiming Princess Charlotte had been hospitalized for something serious and ongoing. Reporters were closing in. Paparazzi were already outside the private clinic where she'd been treated. The palace had two choices: remain silent and risk the tabloids publishing half-truths, or speak up and attempt to shape the narrative. They chose the latter, reluctantly. Behind closed doors, the discussion had been heated. Some senior advisors argued that the public had a right to know the truth, especially after weeks of canceled royal engagements. Others insisted that disclosing too much could expose the child to lifelong media scrutiny. But when William arrived at the palace that morning, his decision was final. "We'll tell them," he said quietly, his voice breaking. "But we'll tell them our way." He approved the final wording himself: brief, careful, deliberately vague. He wanted to control the tone, not the emotion. He wanted the world to understand the gravity without sensationalism. Catherine agreed, though her heart ached with every word. To her, it felt like surrendering her daughter's privacy to a machine that never stopped hungering for more. Yet, even as they signed off on the release, both knew what was coming. Because once the statement went live, there would be no turning back. The reaction was immediate and overwhelming. The gates of Buckingham Palace transformed into a sea of flowers and letters within hours. Children wrote notes in crayon. Elderly citizens knelt to pray. Strangers hugged outside the palace, united in collective grief for a little girl they'd never met but somehow felt they knew. It wasn't pity. It was empathy. For once, the public didn't see a princess. They saw a child, fragile and human. And that, in its own way, terrified the royal family. Because vulnerability wasn't part of the monarchy's brand. Not anymore. Since the days of Diana, the royal institution had worked tirelessly to build an image of controlled stability, smiles, diplomacy, duty. Illness didn't fit that narrative. But the people didn't want perfection anymore. They wanted truth. And Princess Charlotte's story gave them that, in its rawest, most heartbreaking form. Still, as the sympathy grew, so did the questions. What kind of autoimmune condition was it? How rare? How serious? Medical experts began appearing on every channel, speculating without confirmation. Some suggested juvenile lupus. Others whispered about early signs of juvenile arthritis or immune deficiencies. The palace refused to clarify. Every refusal only deepened the mystery. Conspiracy threads began to emerge online, some sympathetic, some cruel. Others believed the illness was being exaggerated for privacy leverage. The darker corners of the internet turned tragedy into speculation. And the palace, once again, was losing control. Within 24 hours, senior royal correspondents were demanding briefings. News agencies requested official clarification. But the palace's response was the same for everyone. No further comment. That silence, once a mark of royal dignity, now sounded like avoidance. Inside Kensington Palace, Catherine watched the coverage in quiet despair. Every channel showed her daughter's face, smiling in old clips, waving from balconies, playing with her brothers. Her laughter looped endlessly over somber music, a cruel contrast to the reality Catherine was living through. At one point, she turned the television off and whispered to William, "She's not a story. She's our child." William nodded. But even he knew there was no way to stop the story now. Because the world wasn't just reacting to an announcement. It was reacting to the symbolism of it. The idea that even the royal family, with all its wealth and privilege, was powerless against the one enemy that didn't care who you were: illness. Doctors described autoimmune conditions as the body turning against itself. That phrase haunted Catherine. It felt like a cruel metaphor for their lives. A family turning inward, consumed by its own secrets and duties. As the day went on, messages poured in from across the globe. Presidents, celebrities, activists, even the Pope, sent public wishes of support. The Prime Minister's office released a statement praising the family's courage. Flags across Commonwealth nations were flown at half-mast in symbolic solidarity. But while the world saw unity, inside the palace something very different was happening. A quiet war was brewing between the press office and the inner family circle. Some aides accused others of leaking the diagnosis early. Others believed the statement had been watered down to hide the severity. The once tightly knit royal operation was fracturing under pressure. At one point, a senior advisor reportedly stormed out of a meeting, muttering, "We've lost control of this narrative." Again, and perhaps he was right. Because even as the world mourned, the story was already evolving. That evening, several outlets published exclusive insider reports suggesting the condition wasn't newly discovered at all, that early symptoms had appeared months ago but were kept private to avoid public panic. One even claimed that a senior royal doctor had raised concerns internally, only to be overruled. The palace issued a rare midnight denial. These claims are categorically untrue. But by then, the damage was done. The public's sympathy had begun to shift into suspicion. If the palace could hide this for so long, what else were they hiding? Catherine felt the weight of it all pressing down on her chest. Every decision, every word withheld, now felt like a mistake. That night, unable to sleep, she sat by Charlotte's bedside in the royal medical suite and watched her daughter breathe. The soft hum of the machines reminded her that this wasn't a nightmare she could wake up from. This was their new reality. Charlotte stirred in her sleep, her tiny hand twitching under the blanket. Catherine reached out instinctively, whispering, "You're safe, my darling." But even as she said it, she wasn't sure she believed it. Because somewhere deep inside, she knew there was something the doctors hadn't said yet, something lurking behind their calm tones and clinical reassurances. And she was right. The following morning, as the world continued to dissect the official statement, a private medical report was delivered directly to William and Catherine. It was confidential, stamped with the royal crest, and marked for immediate review. Inside were details about the autoimmune condition, information that hadn't been disclosed publicly or even to most palace staff. The report revealed that Charlotte's illness wasn't just rare, it was extremely rare, with fewer than 100 documented cases worldwide in children her age. Even more alarming, it carried a hereditary marker, something that could be traced back through generations. The words blurred as William read them. He turned to Catherine and whispered, "This might not have started with her." For a moment, neither spoke. The implications were too heavy. A hereditary condition meant history, and history meant secrets. Could it be possible that someone else in the royal line had suffered from the same illness, hidden by the strict medical confidentiality that has always protected the monarchy's vulnerabilities? As they sat in stunned silence, a new wave of panic began to spread through the palace communications team. Someone inside the medical circle had leaked part of the report to the press. Journalists were now hinting that the condition had historical connections within the royal bloodline. The story was no longer about a child's diagnosis. It was about legacy, and that terrified the king. Charles, who had been briefed earlier in the day, immediately called for an emergency meeting. His face, usually so composed, betrayed exhaustion and worry. He was a grandfather first in that moment, but he was also a monarch aware that every personal weakness could become political ammunition. The room fell silent as he spoke. "We protect the child," he said, "at all costs. But the truth, the whole truth, cannot come out." Those words echoed like thunder through the palace halls. Because if the hereditary link were ever proven, It could reignite decades-old questions about royal genetics, secrecy, and the burdens of bloodlines. It could shake the public's trust in the institution itself. So, once again, silence became strategy. But silence has a way of backfiring. The next morning, when the press asked for updates, they were told none would be given. No medical details, no future statements, no photographs. And just like that, compassion turned into curiosity. Curiosity turned into obsession. Reporters began digging into royal archives, old medical histories, and records of unexplained illnesses in the family's past. They unearthed names, dates, and strange coincidences. A great-aunt who died young, a cousin who vanished from public life due to health concerns. Each discovery added fuel to a fire the palace couldn't extinguish. And Catherine, watching helplessly from the sidelines, realized something awful. The truth wasn't just coming. It was already here, leaking through cracks too wide to patch. Her daughter's story was no longer theirs to protect. It belonged to the world now, and to the history books that would one day judge every choice they made. As she stood by the window that night, looking out over the palace courtyard, the flash of camera lights in the distance reminded her of a hauntingly familiar scene. The relentless pursuit that once claimed Diana's peace. And she whispered under her breath, "Not again." But what neither she nor William knew was that someone inside the palace, someone with access to both medical records and history files, was preparing to reveal everything. A letter was already on its way. A letter that would expose secrets buried for generations. A letter that would turn heartbreak into scandal. And when it arrived, nothing, not even the crown, would be safe. Buckingham Palace has always projected an image of order, marble halls, polished silver, and perfectly timed ceremony. But on that morning, everything inside those walls felt wrong. The rhythm was off. The staff moved quietly, deliberately, as though sound itself might disturb something fragile. Even the air felt heavy. Behind the glittering facade, the royal household had descended into silent chaos. The palace may have looked calm from the outside, but beneath its grand chandeliers, tension rippled like a current. Everyone knew something monumental had shifted, something they weren't supposed to talk about. And yet, everyone was talking. In hushed tones, in corridors, behind closed doors, whispers spread faster than any official memo ever could. She's still in hospital. The doctors are worried. The king hasn't slept. Every rumor was a spark, and in a palace built on tradition and secrecy, sparks are dangerous. By mid-morning, an emergency meeting was called. Senior aides, communications heads, and private secretaries gathered in the crimson-walled Lancaster room, a chamber that had seen everything from royal births to political crises. Now, it would host something far more personal, a family in quiet distress. At the head of the table sat King Charles III. He looked older than his years that day. The weight of monarchy and grandfatherhood pressed on him in equal measure. His hands, clasped tightly together, trembled ever so slightly as he listened to the updates from William's private secretary. "She's stable," the aide began cautiously, responding to treatment. "But the doctors still can't guarantee when or if the flare-ups will stop." The words hung in the air like fog. Charles leaned back, exhaling slowly. "And the press?" he asked. "They're circling, Your Majesty," the communications director replied. "We've managed to keep most away from the hospital, but someone inside leaked a preliminary medical summary. They're claiming hereditary connections. We've denied it, but..." He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The implication was clear. The king's gaze dropped to the table, his voice barely above a whisper. "It's happening again." Those words sent chills through the room. The one thing every royal feared. The cycle of leaks, rumors, and betrayals that had destroyed the family's public trust decades earlier. Diana, Fergie, the Andrews scandals. Every chapter had begun with a whisper from within. And now, history was repeating itself, but this time, it was about a child. While the king strategized, William sat quietly at the far end of the table, his face pale, his expression unreadable. He wasn't there as heir apparent. He was there as a father who hadn't slept in days. The weight of duty pressed against the desperation of parenthood, and for once, he couldn't tell which side was winning. Catherine wasn't present. She was still at the hospital, refusing to leave Charlotte's side. William had begged her to rest, but she wouldn't hear of it. She had her laptop with her, researching every possible treatment, reaching out to experts across the world, not as the Princess of Wales, but as a mother searching for hope. Back in Buckingham, the staff tried to keep the routine going. Footmen polished the silver. Gardeners tended to the roses. But everyone could feel it, the dread, the uncertainty. Even the palace guards, trained to stand motionless for hours, exchanged brief glances of concern. It wasn't just the illness that frightened them. It was the silence around it. Because within the royal machine, silence is often more telling than speech. When the palace stops talking, it means the truth is too dangerous to speak aloud. One of the maids, a quiet woman named Margaret who'd served the family for years, described it later. You could feel it in the walls, like the palace itself was holding a secret. And she wasn't wrong. In one of the private offices tucked deep within the West Wing, an archivist named James Pembroke was quietly sorting through historical medical files, a routine task that suddenly didn't feel routine at all. The king had ordered a review of past royal health conditions, hoping to disprove the rumor of a hereditary connection. But as James flipped through the dusty ledgers, one document caught his eye. A file dated 1948, labeled Confidential, Restricted Access. The name on it made his heart stop. Princess Victoria Alexandra, a distant relative, barely mentioned in modern records. The document described symptoms hauntingly similar to Charlotte's: recurring fevers, immune inflammation, tissue swelling. The same markers, nearly identical phrasing. James froze. He wasn't a doctor, but even he could see the parallel. The handwriting in the margin, though faded, was unmistakably royal physician script. Next to it, a note: condition believed hereditary. Advised permanent discretion. His hands trembled as he closed the file. He shouldn't have seen that. He knew what royal secrecy meant. Still, the thought gnawed at him. Could it really be the same condition resurfacing generations later? He looked up at the sealed cabinet, realizing there were dozens more files just like it. If the rumors were true, then Charlotte's illness wasn't a random tragedy. It was part of the royal bloodline, hidden and forgotten. Meanwhile, William received a private update from Catherine. Charlotte had woken briefly, weak but alert. She'd asked for her favorite storybook, the one about the brave princess who outsmarted the dragon. William's throat tightened as he listened. She smiled. Catherine whispered over the phone. Even after everything. For a moment, he could barely speak. She's stronger than all of us, he said. But that fleeting moment of hope was shattered minutes later, when one of his aides burst into the room. Sir, the press knows about the hospital's name. Paparazzi are gathering. William's composure cracked. He slammed his phone down, his voice echoing. I asked for discretion, but discretion was a luxury the royal family no longer had. Within the hour, photos began circulating online, long-lens shots of the hospital entrance, blurred figures of staff and security. One image, taken from across the street, showed Catherine stepping out briefly to take a call, exhaustion etched on her face. The palace scrambled to control the damage. Cease and desist letters were sent to media outlets. Statements of invasion of privacy were drafted. But it was like trying to stop a storm with an umbrella. Inside the palace, tempers flared. Senior advisors clashed over strategy. Some blamed the communications team. Others whispered that someone inside the hospital had been paid to leak. And amid all the chaos, King Charles retreated to his private study, his trusted valet the only witness to what happened next. The king opened his diary, a ritual he rarely skipped, and wrote only a single line. We are losing the very thing my mother guarded most: control. Outside, the storm raged. The British public, loyal yet inquisitive, wanted reassurance. But none came. And with each passing day of silence, theories grew wilder. Was Charlotte's condition worsening? Had the royal doctors failed to diagnose it earlier? Was it genetic? Even royal biographers began digging through family archives, tracing obscure health records, medical rumors, and mysterious early deaths. The press dubbed it the hidden illness of Windsor. In living rooms across Britain, families discussed it over dinner as if it were a national mystery. For once, gossip didn't stem from scandal, it stemmed from concern. People weren't angry. They were afraid. Because if something could touch Princess Charlotte, it could touch anyone. Inside the hospital, Catherine overheard nurses whispering when they thought she couldn't hear. They say it's hereditary, one murmured. They say it's been in the family for generations. She froze. She hadn't told anyone that, not even William. The next morning, a thick envelope arrived at Buckingham Palace addressed to His Royal Highness the Prince of Wales. No sender, no return address, just a royal wax seal pressed in unfamiliar red. William opened it cautiously. Inside were photocopies of old medical records, the same ones James Pembroke had found. At the bottom of one page was a note in handwriting he didn't recognize. It began long before Charlotte. Stop pretending it didn't. William's hands shook as he stared at the words. He looked up at his aide, who stood pale-faced. Who sent this? We don't know, sir, the aide replied. But if this is authentic, someone inside the archives wants the truth out. William sank into his chair, his mind racing. He knew what this meant. If the illness had a hereditary link, and if the palace had covered it up before, the revelation could ignite a crisis unlike any before. The monarchy had survived scandals, divorces, and betrayals. But hiding a medical truth, especially about a child, could destroy what little trust remained. And yet, he couldn't go public. Not yet. Charlotte was still fighting, still fragile. The last thing she needed was to become the centerpiece of another royal storm. He folded the letter carefully, locked it in his desk, and whispered to himself, "We protect her first. Everything else can burn." That night, Catherine finally convinced Charlotte to rest. She sat beside her daughter's bed, brushing her hair back, humming softly. Charlotte, eyes half closed, murmured, "Mummy, am I going to be okay?" Catherine hesitated. "Yes, my love, you're going to be okay." But her voice cracked on the last word. Because she'd seen the same report. She knew the condition could be managed, not cured. She knew this was for life. And now, with whispers of hereditary links, she couldn't help but wonder what else the royal doctors weren't telling them. She turned off the light, her heart pounding, and looked out the window toward the palace in the distance. Somewhere in those walls, secrets were shifting, old ones waking up. And when they finally came to light, the truth wouldn't just expose the past. It would reshape the royal family's future. Because if this illness truly ran through royal blood, then the story of the Windsors wasn't one of strength and endurance. It was one of inheritance, of a legacy no crown could protect them from. And that realization, more than any diagnosis, was what terrified them most. What came next would force the royal family to confront their most guarded history, a truth buried so deep that even the king himself might wish it had stayed forgotten. The truth didn't break like a wave. It crept in, quietly, slowly, almost respectfully, until the palace could no longer pretend it didn't exist. The whispers had already reached every corner of London. Doctors were talking, insiders were hinting, and the media was closing in. Everyone wanted to know what exactly was wrong with Princess Charlotte. Behind closed doors, the royal medical team gathered for a meeting unlike any other. The conference room at St. Mary's private wing was filled with specialists, immunologists, pediatricians, geneticists, all handpicked for their discretion as much as their expertise. The atmosphere was clinical but tense. Everyone understood that this wasn't just a diagnosis. It was a matter of national interest. The lead physician, Dr. Eleanor Walsh, cleared her throat, her voice steady but her eyes heavy with concern. "Your Royal Highness," she said, turning to Prince William, "we have confirmation. The condition is autoimmune in nature, rare, chronic, and lifelong. It's officially classified as juvenile autoimmune polyendocrine syndrome." The words landed like stones. William blinked, trying to process them. Catherine sat beside him, her hands folded tightly in her lap. The terms sounded sterile, almost harmless, until the explanation began. Dr. Walsh continued gently. "In simple terms, the body's immune system, which should protect her, is misfiring. It's attacking healthy organs and tissues as though they were threats. In Charlotte's case, it affects multiple systems, her skin, joints, and endocrine glands. It's unpredictable. It can flare without warning." Catherine felt her chest tighten. "Flare?" she whispered. "It means some days she'll seem perfectly fine," Dr. Walsh explained. "And others, she'll struggle to even get out of bed." The doctor's tone softened. "It's not fatal, Your Royal Highness. With careful management, she can live a long, full life. But it will always be there, like a shadow." A shadow. That word stuck in Catherine's mind. For a moment, neither parent spoke. They just sat there, the silence between them filled with fear and disbelief. The future they had envisioned for their daughter, The confidence, the laughter, the endless energy suddenly seemed fragile. William finally broke the silence. "Is it genetic?" he asked, his voice low. Dr. Walsh hesitated. "There is a hereditary component, yes. Not always direct, but the markers can pass down through generations. We believe there may have been historical cases within your family line, though records from previous centuries are incomplete." Incomplete. That was the palace's favorite word when it came to inconvenient truths. Catherine exchanged a glance with William. They both knew what that meant. The whispers were right. This wasn't new. This was old, buried, disguised, forgotten. The doctor continued outlining the next steps: immune-suppressing treatments, hormonal therapy, dietary restrictions, physical therapy sessions. The list was long, overwhelming. Each phrase felt like another weight pressing down on them. Charlotte, blissfully unaware of the meeting's gravity, was back in her hospital bed, reading her favorite story about knights and dragons. To her, the doctors were friendly visitors with kind smiles and cold hands. She didn't understand why her parents looked so worried, or why the nurses spoke in quiet tones when they thought she wasn't listening. Catherine returned to her daughter's side later that evening, sitting quietly by the bed. She reached out to touch Charlotte's hand, small, delicate, but strong. "Do you know what the doctors said today?" she asked softly. Charlotte shook her head, eyes still on her book. "They said you're very brave," Catherine said, forcing a smile. "And very special. Your body's just a little confused sometimes, but we'll help it remember what to do." Charlotte looked up, puzzled. "Like it forgets?" "Something like that," Catherine said. "But you have a lot of people helping you, and you're going to be okay." The child nodded slowly, satisfied with the answer. "Okay," she whispered, before returning to her story. Catherine watched her in silence, her throat tight with emotion. She wanted to believe her own words. She wanted to believe that medicine, love, and faith would be enough. But deep down, she knew the hardest battles aren't fought in hospitals, they're fought in hearts. Outside the hospital, the world still demanded answers. News anchors speculated late into the night. An autoimmune condition. "What does that mean for the young princess?" one asked gravely. Medical experts appeared on talk shows, explaining symptoms and outcomes. Every segment ended the same way, with more questions than answers. And still, the palace refused to elaborate. But inside the institution, conversations were far more complex. The hereditary link terrified them, because if this condition truly ran in the royal bloodline, it opened a Pandora's box of implications. What else had been passed down through generations? What else had been hidden in the name of tradition and stability? Behind the scenes, King Charles called his private physician, Sir Andrew Kellerman, to Windsor Castle. "I want the full historical record," the king said bluntly. "Everything on record. Every anomaly. Every unexplained illness in the family. No exceptions." Sir Andrew hesitated. "Your Majesty, some of those documents are delicate." Charles's tone hardened. "So is my granddaughter's health." That order sent shockwaves through the royal archives. Files sealed for decades were suddenly being reviewed, reclassified, and cross-referenced with modern medical data. What they found only deepened the mystery. Scattered records of royal children who'd fallen ill, vanished from public view, or been described as frail. But in none of those cases had the full diagnosis been disclosed, not even to the family. Meanwhile, the doctors treating Charlotte noticed something strange. Her immune responses weren't following standard patterns. Blood samples showed unusual antibody activity, markers seen only in rare cases of autoimmune disorders triggered by stress and environmental exposure. It was as though her body had been fighting a battle long before the symptoms showed. Dr. Walsh decided to perform a deeper genetic panel. It revealed something unexpected, a dormant gene variant connected to immune dysregulation, one that matched samples found in archival records of a royal ancestor from over a century ago. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't coincidence. It was inheritance. When the report reached the palace, the implications were staggering. The same rare mutation that caused Charlotte's condition had appeared in distant relatives, suggesting it had been silently passed through generations, hidden beneath titles, marriages, and royal discretion. William stared at the report in disbelief. "So this was always there," he said slowly. "Lurking in us. Waiting." Dr. Walsh nodded. "It's not something you could have predicted. It's recessive, dormant. It only activates under very specific conditions. But it's there. The words made his blood run cold. For centuries, the monarchy had prided itself on strength, endurance, divine right. And yet, within their very DNA lay fragility. A reminder that even blue blood carries flaws. As the doctors continued their tests, new details emerged. The syndrome could affect the thyroid, adrenal glands, and immune response, leading to fatigue, joint pain, and hormonal imbalance. Symptoms could wax and wane unpredictably. One week Charlotte might dance at a school recital. The next, she might need to stay in bed for days. It was a life of managing the unpredictable. And for a family whose entire existence depended on public appearances and precision, unpredictability was the one thing they couldn't control. Catherine tried to hide her worry from her children, but George and Louis noticed. "Is Lottie sick forever?" George asked one evening. Catherine hesitated, her heart breaking. "She'll get better, sweetheart. But she'll need a bit more help than the rest of us sometimes." Louis frowned. "Can we help?" Catherine smiled faintly. "You already are, just by loving her." That night, when the children went to bed, Catherine sat by the window, staring at the London skyline. She thought of Diana, how she'd faced the world's cruelty with quiet strength. And now Catherine understood what Diana must have felt. That love can be the most powerful shield, and yet the most painful weapon. Because no amount of love could cure what science could not. By now, the media had caught wind of the autoimmune diagnosis. Newspapers ran headlines like "Bravery of Princess Charlotte" and "Royal Family Faces Lifetime Battle." But others began probing deeper, questioning the hereditary link. Could this be the Windsor curse? One tabloid blared. The palace dismissed it as sensationalism, but the phrase stuck. The Windsor curse, a poetic, cruel simplification of a complex truth. Meanwhile, the doctors urged caution. Stress and exposure could worsen her condition, Dr. Walsh warned. "We must minimize her public appearances, keep her away from large crowds, avoid extremes of temperature." William frowned. "You're telling me we have to hide her?" "Not hide," the doctor replied carefully. "Protect." But hiding and protecting, in the royal world, often meant the same thing. For the first time, William began to understand why his mother had rebelled against the system, why she'd refused to let the palace dictate what love looked like. Because when duty clashes with humanity, someone always suffers. He vowed it wouldn't be his daughter. Still, he couldn't shake the feeling that the more they learned, the less they understood. Each discovery led to another question. Each answer opened another door. And then came the breakthrough, one that neither science nor history could explain. Dr. Walsh discovered that the condition's gene variant wasn't unique to Charlotte. It had also been identified in early 20th century European aristocracy, specifically in families connected to the Windsors by marriage. That meant this illness wasn't just royal. It was aristocratic. Somewhere in the tangled web of lineage, the sickness had crossed borders and centuries, quietly weaving itself into royal DNA. When William read the findings, a chilling realization hit him. The monarchy had unknowingly preserved not only its bloodline, but its weaknesses too. He looked up from the report, his voice barely above a whisper. "We inherited more than the crown." The room fell silent. In that moment, the full weight of legacy hit him. The pomp, the duty, the lineage, all built on foundations more fragile than anyone dared admit. As night fell, Catherine returned to Charlotte's room. Her daughter was asleep, the faint rhythm of her breathing filling the quiet. Catherine brushed a strand of hair from her face and whispered, "You're not alone in this, my darling. You never will be." But just as she stood to leave, her phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. It read, "The royal doctors haven't told you everything. Ask about Victoria Alexandra. Ask what they found in her blood." Catherine froze. Her hand trembled as she read it again. The name, Victoria Alexandra, was the same one William had seen in the old file. She looked back at her daughter, sleeping peacefully under soft white sheets, unaware of the storm brewing around her. And in that moment, Catherine knew one thing for certain. The truth wasn't buried in the past. It was still alive, and someone inside the palace wanted it exposed. What she would uncover next would not only change her understanding of her daughter's illness, but reveal a royal secret that had been hidden for nearly a century. And when that secret came to light, it would tear open wounds the monarchy thought had healed long ago. There's a cruel kind of clarity that only comes after the fact, the kind that makes every past moment feel like a missed warning. For William and Catherine, that realization hit like a slow-motion avalanche. Looking back, the signs had been there all along. It began subtly, almost invisibly. Charlotte had always been spirited, fearless even. The little girl who tugged her brother's hands at royal events, who corrected George's posture during balcony appearances, who ran to shake hands with strangers while security panicked behind her. Her laughter could melt the tension of any royal gathering. She was the heart that reminded everyone the monarchy still had warmth left. But that light had started to flicker months before the world knew. The first sign came during an ordinary day at school.